The Altamaha River Delta, rich in nutrients from the upriver country of Georgia, has long been the main artery of survival for this area's residents. The north branch of the Altamaha runs beside present-day Darien, but the historical importance of this river dates back to long before the town. Archaeological excavations along the lower bluff site in the 1950s and 60s revealed indications of an Indian village and a Spanish mission post. The Indians, called Wali by the Spanish, are the earliest recorded inhabitants of coastal Georgia. French artist Jacques Lemoyne, who visited the Southeast in 1564, presents a picture of the lifestyle of the Wali Indians. They lived in small huts made from clay plastered onto pole frames. These wattle and daub huts protected them from the coastal environment. The early Wali Indians were hunters, fishermen, and foragers who depended on the bountiful supply of game animals and fish from the rivers and forest. Alligators were hunted and killed by thrusting sharpened poles down their throats and then turning them over and killing them with spears, arrows, and clubs. The Wali also practiced agriculture, planting fields of pole beans, squash, and corn. Archaeologists found this small clay bowl filled with these tiny ears of corn still intact. Using small dugout boats, the Indians could travel the many waterways of this area. Ceremonies were often held in the Wali villages, and one of the favorite beverages for these rituals was a tea-like drink made from the yopan holly or the casina bush. Games and exercises provided the Indians with the skills they would use later in battles and in hunting. With the arrival of the Europeans, the Wali were exposed to a new culture that provided tools and goods that they soon became dependent upon. Spanish missionaries from St. Augustine set up missions along the islands and the major riverways. While mission activity flourished for many years, not all the Indians greeted the priests with open arms. In 1597, they rebelled, killing many coastal priests. One was Father Pedro de Corpa. Killed and beheaded by militant Indians, his skull was staked out on a river bluff, a fair warning to others. With the British push southward from Carolina came raids upon the Wali from a tribe to the north. The Wali deserted the coastal area, which remained uninhabited through the last decades of the 17th century. With the advent of the 1700s, control of the area developed into an international rivalry between France, Spain, and Britain. All three countries wanted control of the mighty Altamaha. To counter the threat, the British recruited a company of provincial scouts from nearby South Carolina, led by Colonel John Barnwell. They built a southern English fortification at the site of the abandoned Indian village. Called Fort King George after His Majesty King George I of Britain, the fort was designed like other English fortifications being built in Europe and North America. Surrounded by a moat, earthworks, and a palisade fence, the fort's main defense was a 26-foot square blockhouse where inhabitants retreated in case of a sudden attack. The massive three-story structure towered 40 feet from its foundation to the top of its gabled roof. The first floor was used to store powder, ammunition, and supplies. The second floor, or gun room, had cannon ports for firing on enemy boats attacking from the river. On the third floor, lookout windows high in the gabled end gave the fort's garrison a commanding view of the entire Altamaha Delta, with St. Simon's Island in the distance. Both the second and third floors had loopholes in the walls for the firing of muskets. The Fort King George blockhouse was constructed of cypress. The cypress came from 3 miles upstream and had to be cut by Barnwell's scoutmen under the most horrid of conditions, in the blazing summer sun and clouds of biting flies and mosquitoes. The cypress was cut into planks manually by men working on pit saws. To build the blockhouse, the soldiers first erected a post and beam frame using huge 1-foot square beams. Into the framework, the men routed channels, then 4-inch vertical planks, thick enough to repel a musket ball, were simply slid into place without nails or pegs. Although built by provincial scouts, the fort was garrisoned by soldiers recruited from His Majesty's Independent Company of Foot, the 41st Regiment. Known as an invalid regiment, it consisted of older soldiers, veterans of foreign campaigns in Europe. Many of these soldiers were in poor health when they arrived from Britain. They spent a year in a hospital in South Carolina before coming to Fort King George in 1722. The Invalid Regiment garrisoned the fort until 1727, but only by having constant replacements. From the early days, death stalked the garrison. Disease, boredom, and excessive drinking, accompanied by malnutrition and unfamiliar climatic conditions, took its toll on the soldiers along the Altamaha River bluff. In 1 year, over 2/3 of the garrison perished. In 1725, the fort mysteriously caught fire and was rebuilt with thin planking. Heavy protests by the soldiers and their officers brought withdrawal from the fort to South Carolina in 1727. Although Fort King George was engaged in no major battles, the threat from Spanish-occupied Florida was a constant reality. Spain protested the English presence in what they had claimed as their territory from the early mission days along the coast. 2 lookouts were stationed here until 1736, when the area was settled. General James Oglethorpe chose the Altamaha River for a southern defensive post below Savannah. This fortified town, called Darien, was built by a group of Highlanders. Proud fighting men, the Scots under the command of Oglethorpe conducted several military campaigns against their neighbors in Florida. In 1742, when the Spanish marched against the town of Frederica on St. Simon's Island, it was the Scots from Darien who were instrumental in their defeat in what has become known as the Battle of Bloody Marsh. After Bloody Marsh, the threat of Spanish aggression decreased, and Darien settlers were able to move to outlying areas away from the fort. This tabby structure, made from oyster shells, has yielded an abundance of artifacts, giving us a picture of the lifestyles of these early settlers. Darien provided lumber from tidal-powered sawmills to nearby towns such as Savannah. These pilings and small holding ponds on the site today are all that remain of the tidal-powered mills of that era. With the availability of steam power came large gang mills capable of handling the huge timber rafted down the Altamaha. Lumber was loaded aboard timber schooners and shipped to all parts of the world. Darien became one of the foremost timber ports on the East Coast, but heavy cutting of the vast upriver forest of cypress and yellow pine brought an end to the sawmilling on the lower bluff in the 1920s. Today, visitors to Fort King George are greeted by the same sights and sounds which met the early recruits upon their arrival in 1721. One cannot help but wonder what effect this alien environment had upon those British soldiers. Many of them eventually were buried in the sandy soil of the new southern English frontier, so many thousands of miles from home. Here, on this bluff, with its abundance of plant and animal life, part of their history has been recreated. The rest has been reclaimed by the nature that surrounds it. What remains today are the memories, the echoes of thousands of years along the Altamaha.